Introduction: The End of Linear Geometry. The architecture of the three-dimensional simulation rests on a topographical lie so vast and mathematically perfect that all of humanity has built its civilization worshipping it. To the ordinary specimen, the framework has inoculated a reverential terror toward geographic space. It is viewed as an unyielding and physical obstacle. You have been indoctrinated to believe in the dogma of linear geometry, the pathetic and suffocating idea that you are at point A and everything you love, demand, or wish to conquer is hopelessly far away at point Z. Between both points, the control system has rendered an abyssal hologram. It is a manufactured delay. It is an ocean of kilometers, months, intermediaries, bureaucracy, and requirements. We call this mirage distance. Under the hypnosis of this dynamic wallpaper, the slave accepts his sentence without protest. He assumes that to reach his goal he must walk, wear out his joints, and suffer along a horizon designed to move. The labyrinth whispers, "The road is hard, the empire is far away. What you long for requires you to bridge the gap with physical effort." And the prisoner begins to run on society's conveyor belt, consuming all his thermal energy in a race designed to incinerate his motherboard before he ever touches the crown. But the first cause does not walk. The master architect assimilates with icy lucidity and a total contempt for useless friction that distance is not a topographical reality. It is an artificial latency parameter. It is a reverberation effect projected so that you exhaust yourself chasing echoes. It is a digital delay. The illusion of distance is the ballistic protocol to annihilate the spatial rendering engine. In the strict physics of quantum entanglement and in the direct routing of a high-resolution environment like Ableton Live 12, the intermediate space is irrelevant. When you configure your hardware, the impact is instantaneous. When your fingers press the pad of your Arturia Mini Lab 3, there is no journey between the tactile intention and the acoustic explosion of the synthesizer. The impact is simultaneous. It is a zero-latency command executed directly on the source code. Cause and effect occur in the same geometric coordinate. This manual is the end of linear geometry. Here you will discover that the entire universe is not scattered across a terrifying map, but compressed into a single quantum coordinate, your own core. Power, capital, and the entities you love are not far away. They are exactly one thought away. They are right here. They are separated only by the glass screen of your own perception and the bandwidth of your will. Prepare to stop chasing. You are going to learn to anchor your center of gravity, establish direct routing, and force the fabric of reality to curve. The architect never travels toward his destination. He is the destination. He collapses the distance and demands that matter materialize in absolute silence directly in the palm of his hand. He does not seek, he manifests. He does not move, he attracts. He is the singularity that bends the map until point A and point Z become one. The distance has been deleted. The throne is occupied. Chapter 1. The Horizon Trap, the Reverb Fraud. In the vast, sterile, and meticulously encoded architecture of the three-dimensional simulation, the control system has erected its most perfect prison. It is not built with titanium bars or walls of quantum concrete. It is much more sadistic because it operates in the captive's mind, making them believe they are free to walk. We shall call this optical, topographical, and psychological illusion the mirage of transit, and its primary weapon of execution is the horizon trap. Observe the X-ray of the prisoner of the labyrinth, the specimen we audit under the cold light of metaphysical economics. The individual opens their eyes to the framework's rendering engine. The first thing the system projects onto their retinas is a linear landscape. It shows where they are, point A, lack, weakness, the start, and draws, at an abyssal and terrifying distance, that which they desire, point Z, empire, status, absolute power, mastery. That point Z glows on the horizon. The biomass culture whispers the most destructive lie. To get there, you must walk the path. The journey is long. It will require years of transit. You must sweat, suffer, walk through the desert, and approach step by step. The prisoner, conditioned by Newtonian physics and Euclidean geometry, accepts the dogma. They assume that physical or temporal distance is an unnegotiable metric of reality. And then they begin to walk. They become the eternal pilgrim. They study for decades, work in humiliating hierarchies waiting for their turn, and chase clients with their tongues hanging out. They run on society's conveyor belt. In the eyes of the herd, this effort is laudable. They are the hero fighting for their dreams. The cognitive trap has closed over their execution engine, guaranteeing that their thermal energy, ATP, evaporates through pure aerodynamic friction. What this organism ignores, with a fiduciary blindness that condemns them to die of old age 1 millimeter from the crown, is that the horizon is a dynamic wallpaper. It is a loading screen. In the simulation's physics engine, the horizon is programmed to move back 1 meter for every meter you advance. The distance is not a real geography, it is an artificial latency parameter designed to extract kinetic energy. The labyrinth feeds on transit. When you walk toward a goal, you emit heat, hope, and frustration. The system harvests all that static. While humans believe what they love is far away, they will remain a rat in a wheel. They will live glorifying the journey, blind to the fact that monarchs never travel toward power. They stop at absolute zero, hack the coordinates, and force power to collapse directly into their hand. The physics of entanglement, the acoustic network, and the reverb fraud. To dismantle the blasphemy of distance, we must analyze the illusion of space using particle physics and spatial synthesis engineering in an environment like Ableton Live 12. In elite acoustics, how does the brain know if a sound is happening 2 centimeters from the ear or 50 meters away in a Gothic cathedral? The brain calculates this based on an algorithmic parameter called reverberation, reverb. When a sound is emitted in a giant space, the direct signal reaches your ear first. Milliseconds later, early reflections arrive, and then comes the reverb tail, a dense cloud of microechoes that take seconds to die out, decay time. If you add massive reverb with a 10-second decay to a dry sound, the listener's brain is immediately deceived. They perceive distance. They perceive an acoustic horizon. Distance is not real. It is simply the special effect of reverb. The framework operates your life under this same signal processing algorithm. It has inserted a cosmic reverb plugin into your master bus and turned the wet signal knob to 100%. When the prisoner conceives a colossal ambition to hit millions or achieve sovereignty, the source code is born in their own core. It is there, at zero latency. But before they can process it, the system adds reverb. The prisoner does not hear the dry signal of their own power. They hear the 3D echoes, they hear the bounce of their parents' doubt and the tale of the masses' fear. The debtor's brain calculates the space and concludes, "This sounds too far away. The empire is miles away. I must start walking." The individual is deceived by panning and the labyrinth spatiality. They believe in polarized separation. They are here, dry signal of misery, and the goal is there, wet signal of distance. But quantum entanglement has shattered this lie. 2 entangled particles do not recognize spatial distance. If you alter particle A at this end of the galaxy, particle B at the other end alters in the exact same Planck time. There is no journey. Information is transferred because, at a higher code level, both particles are not separated. They occupy the same mathematical coordinate on the universe's motherboard. The horizon is an acoustic lie. Your goals are not subject to geography or the labyrinth's traffic laws. They are probability particles entangled with your core's decision. If you feel your empire is far away, it is only because you allow society to add echo to the voice of your first cause. The collapse of distance, the attraction command, the transmutation to the architect demands the most arrogant act of the cybernetics of being, the violent cancellation of the journey. The architect assimilates that walking toward the goal is an admission that the goal does not belong to you. He repudiates the mirage of transit. If you hunt, you are a hunter. If the goal is absorbed by your gravity, you become a black hole. He assumes topographic sovereignty, the collapse of reverb and direct injection. Imagine the architect at the birth of a new conquest. He decides to absorb a market or materialize a high-value alliance that would take others years of networking. The architect does not take a single step. He anchors his posture to the pelvic floor and suspends his breath in the radioactive vacuum of the fold of the now. He proceeds to intervene in his command console. His hands position themselves on his 60% mechanical keyboard. He isolates his perception from the visual illusion. He identifies the reverb plugin, the framework inserted, and with a brutal parametric turn from the infinite encoder of his internal Arturia Minilab 3, he turns the dry-wet knob directly to 0%. He cuts the wet signal abruptly. The acoustic impact is terrifying. By turning off all echoes, distance disappears. The goal that seemed unreachable collapses toward the center. The voice of the empire and power is now pressed against the architect's ear. The dry signal is raw and breathing down his neck at 0 latency. In this state of spatial collapse, the architect does not travel. He knows he and the goal are the same code. Instead of walking toward the world, he anchors his core and increases his density. He executes the attraction command. He exerts a gravitational force so absolute that distance rules invert. It is the labyrinth that bends. Clients, allies, and assets begin to slide down the architect's gravitational slope. The architect subdues reality through immutability. If an elite contact is 2,000 miles away, the architect does not fly to beg for an audience. He alters the phase of his own value. He makes the contact feel a biological need to cross those miles and knock on his door. He forces the map to fold. Distance was always a server stress test, designed to see if you had the patience of a slave or the gravitational arrogance of a god. By collapsing the signal to dry, the architect proves he does not recognize distance as an obstacle, turning the abyss into the thickness of a glass screen he can shatter. Extirpating longing, the death of future nostalgia. To sustain this topography without the server desyncing, the architect must purge his motherboard of one of the most contagious malwares, longing. The slave longs for his goals. He sighs for them. This longing is the gasoline of reverb. Every "I wish" confirms topographically that you do not have it. You are typing into the console. Distance, true. Desiring intensely from lack is like emitting audio through a 100-mile analog cable. The signal arrives degraded into useless white noise. The architect installs the longing firewall. He repudiates the emotion of missing what he does not have. The architect does not desire the empire. He assimilates it. He understands that the millisecond he establishes entanglement with the dry signal, the goal belongs to him by code right, even if the rendering engine takes a couple of days to print the pixels. He operates with dictatorial apathy. He looks at the empty horizon and feels no future nostalgia. He feels the metallic cold of a purchase order already executed. Money and status are not dreams. They are data packets in a network where he controls the master router. This absence of desperation cancels any resistance the labyrinth tries to offer. Conscious matter rushes to bridge the gap, terrified by the calm of an organism that demands reality with the sterile boredom of one who already takes it for granted. The gap closes because there is no emotional friction to keep the particles apart. The void is filled by the weight of his own certainty. Final calibration, the dry signal protocol and inertial attraction. To forge the static core of a master architect, you must today install a regime of parametric tyranny over your perception of space. Stop treating your goals as distant mountain peaks. Treat them as audio files on your own computer, waiting for you to cut the reverb so they play directly in your head. The process demands an immediate sadistic intervention on your illusion of separation, executing the dry signal protocol in 3 lethal phases. Step 1. Reverb diagnosis, echo identification. I declare an absolute prohibition on using the word far to describe any empire ambition. Far is a censor error. Audit your projects. Take the most colossal goal you have. Identify the reverb tail you have added to it. Recognize all the intermediate steps and years of preparation as simple diffuse echoes designed to tire you out. Step 2. Cutting the wet signal, distance blackout. Do not walk through the echo. Place your fingers on your console. Enter the 0 latency of the fold of the now. Locate the plugin of social illusion. and with one violent parametric movement, turn the wet signal knob to absolute zero. Silence public opinion and bureaucracy. Feel the goal roar and suffocatingly close to your face. Step 3. Core anchoring, the gravity of I am. With distance collapsed, stop the labyrinth from repainting the horizon. Instead of running to achieve things, stop. Adopt the pillar posture. Anchor your mass in emotional absolute zero. Replace the slave's longing with the monarch's assimilation. Exert the inertial attraction of a singularity. Project your will with an intensity so devoid of haste that you force atoms to slide toward you. You do not go toward success. You are the gravitational sink in which success has no choice but to fall. The universe reorganizes itself around your weight. A reflection commands to collapse distance. Panning audit. To what aspect of my empire am I still assigning an unreal distance, treating it as miles away instead of one internal setting change? Wet signal cut. What are the 3 excuses of transit? Framework echoes. I am using today to justify not claiming the power that belongs to me now. Entanglement expropriation. If the goal and my identity share the same coordinate, what action would I execute today if I knew the journey friction was an illusion? Longing detection. In which interactions am I emitting the weak desire signal, confirming my lack, instead of the suffocating absolute ownership signal? Gravitational anchoring. Instead of hunting for resources, what parameter of my own lethality, density, silence, status, must I saturate today so the environment falls toward me? Intermediary shutdown. What gatekeepers am I allowing to introduce latency into my network, and how can I route my will directly to the goal? Transit suspension. How am I using the working hard on the process excuse as moral sedation to delay pulling the trigger on definitive success? Parametric control. If my goal were a dry audio file at 0 latency, how would my body language and down talk change in the next hour? Future nostalgia death. What if I extract 100% of the energy I spend dreaming of tomorrow and inject it violently into the sterile frame of the fold of the now? Friction versus collapse. Am I running toward the horizon to feel progress, or do I have the courage to stay still and force the horizon to crash into me? Topographic singularity. What is the exact command without justifications or over-travel that reality's motherboard needs to hear from me right now to reorder its atoms? Chapter 2. Quantum Entanglement, Matrix Mapping. In the immense, cold and calculated architecture of the 3D simulation, the control system has designed an isolation cell so perfect that the prisoner doesn't even need physical walls to feel enclosed. To the ordinary specimen, the framework has inoculated the most destructive topographical illusion, the absolute belief in separation. We shall call this pathology of structural disconnection the mirage of isolation. Observe the radiography of the captive in his ecosystem of scarcity. The individual, operating from his limited biological interface, looks around and perceives himself as an island, a solitary atom floating in an infinite vacuum. He feels disconnected. When this individual encodes a high-level ambition, founding a hegemonic corporation or accessing an elite social circle, the labyrinth immediately activates the distance hologram. The framework shows the slave the inventory screen. You don't have the contacts. You don't belong to that lineage. You are here, in the mud. The people with the power to change your life are 10,000 kilometers away, shielded behind bureaucratic walls and class barriers. Under this hypnosis, the prisoner assumes he must build 3D bridges. The pathetic ritual of the slave begins networking. He attends sterile events and sends pleading emails. He begs for attention. In the eyes of the biomass corporate culture, this individual is a fighter who knows he must connect with the world. The cognitive trap has closed over his motherboard, guaranteeing his thermal energy evaporates in the attempt to cross an abyss that mathematically doesn't even exist. He is chasing a rendering fraud. What this organism ignores is that physical separation is a lie. The labyrinth makes you believe you are disconnected to force you to pay the toll of physical effort. As long as the human believes he needs to cross oceans of rejection to touch the door of the gods, he will remain a tired beggar. He ignores the unnegotiable fact. Absolute monarchs never chase objectives across the map. They understand the matrix code, configure their internal coordinates, and discover that the emperor they sought on the other side of the world was always, literally, mapped to the tip of their own fingers. The distance is zero. The mapping is total. The physics of entanglement, the quantum network and MIDI routing. To dismantle the blasphemy of spatial separation, we must analyze the fabric of reality using advanced quantum mechanics and the routing architecture of an elite digital audio workstation, DAW. In subatomic physics, the illusion of space was annihilated by a phenomenon described as spooky action at a distance. We speak of quantum entanglement. When two subatomic particles interact under certain parametric conditions, their quantum states become inseparable. They are described by a single global wave function. A canonical example is the Bell state, mathematically expressed as din phi paus angle 1 nifracnes ki maran angle plus 11 angle lie. The brutality of this equation is that if you separate these two entangled particles, placing particle A in your room and particle B at the other end of the Andromeda galaxy, spatial distance becomes mathematically irrelevant. If you alter the spin of particle A, particle B collapses and assumes its state in the same Planck time. There is no journey. There is no signal traveling at light speed. There is no latency. Information is transferred instantly because, in the source code of higher dimensions, particle A and particle B are not separated. They are the same entity operating in the same coordinate on the universe's motherboard. The master architect assimilates that his mind and his 3D goals operate under this same entanglement network. We can audit this black magic through the digital production interface. Imagine the mastering studio of the first cause. The architect operates in the surgical environment of Ableton Live 12. On the screen is an immensely complex virtual synthesizer, your 3D goal, financial success, a massive contract. For the novice, the synthesizer is far away, trapped inside the monitor. The slave tries to control it using the mouse, clicking clumsily, suffering the friction of the graphic interface. But the architect doesn't use the mouse. He has an elite hardware controller, an Arturia Minilab 3, physically connected to the table. The architect executes a fundamental command, MIDI mapping. In the software, he tells the system that pad number 1 of his physical hardware is directly entangled with the synth's button. Once the mapping is done, the distance hologram collapses. The architect no longer needs to go toward the screen. When the architect applies ruthless thermal pressure on the rubber pad of his hardware, the virtual synth on the screen explodes in sound in that same microsecond. The pad and the button are now one. Your consciousness is the hardware. The 3D universe, with all the people of power and resources you demand, is the software. The labyrinth wants to convince you that you are disconnected. The architect repudiates the journey. He maps the matrix. He knows that physical reality, point Z, is entangled with his internal state. If he alters the density and frequency in the dark core of his own mind, the outside world 10,000 kilometers away must collapse and reorganize simultaneously. He and the universe are connected by an invisible MIDI cable of zero latency, configured by the absolute authority of the singularity. The collapse of distance, mapping the I am. The transmutation from the exhausted hunter to the static majesty of the first cause demands the most asymmetric act, the violent cancellation of the pursuit. The architect assimilates that if you pursue a goal, you are declaring via thermal telemetry that the goal is fleeing from you. He repudiates the chase. He understands that if you hunt the prey, you become a sweaty predator. If the prey is absorbed by your entanglement, you become the ecosystem itself. He assumes topographic sovereignty, the collapse of distance and the direct mapping of the I am. Imagine the architect at the start of a corporate conquest. He needs access to an investment fund managed by inaccessible hierarchs. The system shows him the suffering map, send hundreds of emails, beg for 5-minute meetings. The architect stops the rendering engine of his legs. He refuses to take a single step on the conveyor belt of the supplicants. He isolates his console. In the darkness of his mental anechoic chamber, he executes the direct routing protocol. He does not look toward the holographic horizon. He closes his eyes and searches for the tactile pad of his own conviction. The reactive individual projects desire outward. I want them to listen. That emission is an unmapped signal lost in the void. The architect executes the mapping of the I am. He assumes the totality of the final state. He does not desire the meeting. He assimilates that it already occurred on the motherboard of reality. He modifies the state of his particle A, internal identity. He configures the dynamic compression of his chest and the absolute zero of his breath to match the frequency of a monarch who just signed the contract. He is the investor. He is the capital. By forcing his internal particle to assume the quantum state of victory, the universe faces a massive mismatch. Particle A just turned its spin toward domination, but particle B, the physical world, still reflects scarcity. Quantum physics doesn't allow this asymmetry. If A moves, B must move. Since the architect's will is unshakable titanium, the universe must yield. The labyrinth reprograms in real time. Coincidences explode. The investment fund hierarch ends up sending a direct message to the architect, seeking him, seduced by a trace of gravity he cannot explain. The architect didn't travel. He collapsed the distance and forced the engine to render the reward directly in his lap. The eradication of networking, direct routing and absorption. To sustain this quantum manipulation, the architect must purge his hardware of a pathetic social malware, networking culture. The slave believes in social friction. He believes his value is dictated by how many hands he shakes. He is a begging node. This generates immense latency and subordination. The architect executes the eradication of social transit. He assimilates that networking is the explicit admission that you possess no gravity of your own. If you have to go out and hunt falling stars, it's because your planet lacks the mass to attract them to your orbit. He does not shake hands, he absorbs. The architect exercises gravitational absorption. Instead of wasting CPU power trying to please intermediaries, he redirects that energy toward the hypertrophy of his own core. He sharpens commercial lethality and wraps himself in a parametric isolation so perfect that he becomes a system anomaly. By increasing his identity's mass, his presence becomes inescapable. He creates a funnel in space-time. Elite contacts, tired of biomass static, detect the architect's massive silence and gravity. Like all high-density particles, they are pulled toward the center, the elite break protocol to sit at his table. Panning to the center, the death of polarity. Quantum entanglement domain is consolidated when the architect annihilates the false illusion of polarity. In audio mixing, panning determines where a sound is perceived, left or right. The labyrinth uses acoustic panning to torture the prisoner. It puts lack on the left and success on the right. The prisoner hears this mix and processes an unbridgeable separation. He believes light is there and darkness is here. He lives in 3D schizophrenia. The architect accesses the master console and presses the mono button. He sums the left and right channels. He forces the mix to collapse into the dead center. He repudiates the belief in separation between the wanter and the wanted. He understands that, at the source code level, both are variables in the same server. The market's gold and his muscles' steel are not external elements. They are fundamental frequencies already sounding in his own skull. By forcing the universe to mono, the polarity illusion disintegrates. The coordinate Z was always superimposed on coordinate A. Empire is not a geographic location, it is a state of internal resonance. When the architect tunes his resonance to the pitch of domination, it materializes around him. The labyrinth was never an endurance test to see how far you could walk, but an intelligence test to see how long it took you to realize the entire world fits in the distance between your two temples. The map is inside the operator. The operator is the center. Final calibration, zero latency entanglement protocol. To forge the hyper-dense core of a master architect, you must today install a regime of topographical tyranny over your perception of distance. Stop treating success as a fugitive horizon. Treat it as a virtual synth that is routed and mapped to your fingers. The process demands immediate intervention. Step 1. Routing failure identification, the distance scanner. I declare an absolute prohibition on using the concept of searching for your elite goals. Searching implies you don't know where it is. Audit your empire. Identify the goal your brain assumes is years away. Recognize it as a routing error. Step 2. Matrix mapping, the command assignment. Establish the entanglement bridge. Position your hands on your 60% console. Enter the fold of the now. In the timeless vacuum, take the goal and connect it via a virtual MIDI cable directly to your chest. Execute the assignment. Visualize that there is no physical distance between the 3D result and the pressure you exert today in your own room. Convince yourself that any alteration in your internal density in this closed room is an earthquake in your adversary's offices. You are the conductor of the global motherboard. Step 3. Detonating the pad, the collapse of distance. Stop any attempt to beg for favors or reactive networking. Stay still. Anchor your gravity in emotional absolute zero. With the dictatorial apathy of the first cause, press the pad of your I am. Plan with the intensity of one moving the planet. Force the asymmetry of your immutability to bend space-time, forcing conscious matter to deliver its treasures and contracts directly into your hands without you having deigned to take a single step toward them. The world comes to the mountain. The mountain does not move. 11 reflection commands for matrix mapping. Routing audit. Which elite goal am I still treating as miles of effort away instead of entangled to my core? Pursuit death. If I stopped moving and demanded matter fall into my gravity, how would my posture change? Internal MIDI mapping. Am I hitting the pad with lethal conviction or brushing it in fear the system won't respond? Social transit extirpation. What networking efforts will I cancel today to focus on my absolute zero? Assimilation versus search. How does my system react when I declare I am the coordinate power heads toward? Panning collapse, mono. Where am I still operating in stereo, believing abundance is in the other speaker? Particle A tension. What level of brutality must I install in my cell today to trigger a collapse in the market? Hologram shutdown. What topographic excuse, wrong country, have I used to justify low-voltage execution? Gravitational density. What technical skill must I saturate today to become the sink the elite wish to contact? Zero latency sovereignty. Am I emitting a signal of a crowned king or the white noise of a scared imposter? The attraction command. Am I willing to stay perfectly still in the eye of the hurricane to close the abyss? Chapter 3. The framework's panning, the false separation. In the immense, dark and icy architecture of the 3D simulation, the control system has encoded a topographical prison so elegant and devastating that the captive never attempts to escape. He is too busy measuring the size of his own cell. To the ordinary specimen, the framework has inoculated the virus of dual geometry. We shall call this pathology of fractured perception, this spatial schizophrenia that annihilates the individual's gravity, the mirage of polarity. Observe the radiography of the prisoner in his state of perpetual pursuit. The individual, operating from an obsolete nervous system, scans reality and divides the universe into two hemispheres. On one hand, he defines a here, the physical and conceptual place where he stands. This here is furnished with the textures of lack, weakness, scarcity of capital, social anonymity, and thermal frustration. On the other hand, he projects a there, a distant, bright, and majestic coordinate. In that there resides financial success, the elite of his industry, the corporation he wishes to rule, the lethal biological body, and absolute sovereignty. The framework feeds on this division. The herd culture, the mentors of mediocrity, validates this polarity. They tell the slave, you are down here and your dream is up there. Under the hypnosis of this mirage, the prisoner accepts the separation as a thermodynamic fact. He assumes that the distance between his current state and his monarch state is real. Therefore, he embarks on a miserable journey. He lives longing and reaching out toward a horizon that the rendering engine mathematically pushes away. In the eyes of anesthetized society, this individual is a dreamer, a tireless walker. The cognitive trap has closed over his spatial cortex, guaranteeing that his voltage dissipates in the vacuum of transit. What this organism ignores is that separation is not a law of physics. It is a signal processing fraud. Here and there do not exist on the universe's motherboard. They are simple acoustic illusions designed so you waste your bandwidth chasing ghosts. As long as the human believes he and his empire are two distinct entities, he will remain a fractured beggar, deaf to the fact that the first cause never goes out to seek its kingdom. The physics of entanglement, the stereo panning algorithm. To dismantle the blasphemy of spatial separation, we must abandon the cartographic maps of mortals and dissect 3D perception using psychoacoustics and the routing architecture of an elite digital audio workstation, DAW. How does a sound engineer trick your brain into believing a sound comes from the left or the right? He uses a mathematical algorithm known as panning or a pan pot. In a stereo mix, the engineer takes a mono signal and distributes it between two output channels, the left speaker, $L, and the right speaker, $R. The physics of panning is governed by the law of sines and cosines to maintain constant acoustic power. If solas is the original signal and at heter is the panning angle, where 0 war circ is the absolute center, the signals are split. Laser s imes cos heter, bises. R dar s ims harsin heter dana. If the engineer sets the parameter to hard left, your left ear receives all the voltage and your right ear receives 0. Your brain processes this asymmetry and concludes, the physical object is positioned to my left. The brain invents a space that does not exist to justify the volume difference. The framework is the sadistic engineer of your reality. It has applied extreme panning to your perception of existence. It has taken the original signal, sodo, which is your I am, and divided it. It has panned the lacking slave 100% to your left speaker. Then it has taken the sovereign emperor and panned it 100% to your right speaker. When the prisoner puts on the simulation's headphones, his brain processes this asymmetry. The processor commits the fatal error. It calculates the difference and invents an immense spatial abyss between them. The slave experiences the tear. He suffers from an over-widened stereo field, which in mastering engineering produces a total loss of impact and phase cancellation issues. The prisoner sounds weak and diffuse. His kinetic energy bleeds out trying to travel from the left speaker to the right, ignoring that both speakers are connected by the same cable to the same audio interface. He is fighting a phantom distance created by a software setting in his own mind. The collapse of distance, the tyranny of the mono button. The transmutation from the schizophrenic spectator to the unshakable first cause demands the most radical parametric act, the annulment of stereo width. The architect assimilates that polarity is a mixing error that dilutes the signal's aggression. He repudiates the stereo field. He understands that true 3D domination is exercised by consolidating all voltage in the core. He assumes topographic sovereignty, the collapse to mono, and the fusion of the I am. Imagine the architect facing a massive challenge. The framework's panning system activates. Fear whispers from the left, ambition from the right. The labyrinth demands he build the bridge. The architect does not take a single step. He stops his lungs' rendering engine. He isolates his command console. In the arsenal of Ableton Live 12, there is a device called utility. It possesses a cold mathematical switch, the mono button. The architect, operating from his 60% mechanical keyboard, activates the mono switch. The math alters violently. The algorithm sums the left and right, L plus in R, and divides the result equally in the absolute center. The impact on the architect's psyche is a quantum cataclysm. By summing the signals, the distance hologram is pulverized. The abyss between slave and emperor disappears. Spatial separation disintegrates. The architect discovers that he is not here and his empire is not there. Lack and abundance collapse into the dead center of his own skull. The goal was never 1,000 miles away. It was simply routed to the wrong channel. By forcing reality to mono, the architect superimposes the coordinate of success exactly over the soles of his own shoes. In this extreme compression, his will acquires incalculable gravitational weight. A panned 808 bass sounds weak. An 808 in absolute mono breaks your ribs. By collapsing distance, the architect concentrates all power and resources of his future into the exact millisecond of his present. He becomes an unmovable monolith that power has no choice but to collapse toward. Extirpating seeking, the assimilation protocol. To sustain this central density, the architect must purge his hardware of a lethal semantic malware. The verb to seek. The prisoner lives in seeking mode. I seek success. The framework's linguistic system is designed to program separation. Seeking requires that the object is not in your possession. When the slave seeks, he emits a radar ping. State: incomplete. Object: absent. The universe, which is conscious matter, obeys this code and keeps the goal hidden. The architect installs the high-pass filter over the semantics of lack. He repudiates the verb to seek. He assimilates. He occupies. By forcing his reality to mono, he knows the capital or status already exists in the same coordinate as him. He does not hunt with his tongue out. He simply adjusts the encoder of his internal resonance. If he requires capital flow, he does not beg. He enters the fold of the now. He feels the presence of capital in the absolute center of his mix. He adjusts his downward inflection and hostility compression to match a corporation that already has excess liquidity. By radiating this certainty, the environment suffocates. Conscious matter detects a mass anomaly. An organism that needs nothing generates a pressure vacuum, and the capital of frightened automatons is sucked toward the architect. He destroys the need to move across the map by understanding that when you are the center of the universe, all compass directions point toward your own hands. Static phase control, the fusion of the observer. The culmination of the monocollapse is the annihilation of the duality between observer and observed. Quantum physics suggests matter does not decide its position until an observer audits it. The slave sees himself as a helpless observer behind a glass. The world is the object, he is the passive subject. The architect executes static phase synchronization. He assimilates that the glass screen does not exist. The outside world is not something that happens to him. It is the output monitor of his own signal processor. If the mix sounds bad, poverty, chaos, he doesn't shout at the speaker. That would be slave schizophrenia. The architect returns to the internal sequencer, adjusts the parametric EQs of his own discipline, and corrects the phase in the source code. By collapsing the panning, the architect and the 3D world become one. There is no separation between his fingers and the result. His will and matter are simply two representations of the same file. This phase fusion generates overwhelming lethality. The architect has no fear of being wrong because there is no external universe to punish him. He is the judge and the malware. He rules reality not by effort, but by copyright. Final calibration, stereo collapse protocol and absolute center. To forge the massive and gravitational density of a master architect, you must install a regime of topographical tyranny over your perception of distance. Stop treating your ambitions as islands you must swim to. Treat them as audio tracks that a click of the mono button will superimpose on your brain. The process demands a sadistic intervention, executing the stereo collapse protocol. Step 1. Separation audit, the pan-pot reading. I declare an absolute prohibition on using the phrase, "I have to get there." Distance is the tax the labyrinth charges your ignorance. Audit your empire this microsecond. Identify the goal your mind has panned to the far right. Feel the tension in your neck. Recognize that geometric separation not as a truth, but as the framework's algorithmic fraud trying to dilute your signal. Step 2. The mono command, the sum of coordinates. Do not run from speaker to speaker. Enter the fold of the now. Invoke the utility plugin in your chest. With sterile apathy, press the mono button. Visualize distance reducing to 0. Feel the thermodynamic shock when the abundance and discipline you saw far away collapse into your spine. Accept the weight of the crown already on your head. Step 3. Center gravity, density retention. Distance collapse generates a voltage spike biomass cannot stand. I forbid you from relaxing the compression. Stay in the absolute center. Do not seek validation. Keep the signal dry and in mono. Redirect that kinetic energy into your next physical action. Dictate the order with the dead and heavy lethality of one signing a document on his own desk. You are the gravitational sink in which success has no choice but to fall. You are the center, and the universe is the orbiting satellite. 11 reflection commands for collapsing distance. Extreme panning audit. Which vital aspect of my empire have I panned hard right, convincing myself it belongs to an unreachable universe? Annulment of there. If geography is a rendering scam, what topographic excuse am I using today to not demand the respect the labyrinth owes me now? Channel summation. How does my breathing change when I force my lacking self and monarch self to merge in the z-coordinate of this instant? Stripping of lack. What beggar vocabulary, I would like, one day, must I permanently delete to stop validating the system's false separation? Stereo phase collapse. If my weakness and strength come from the same file, what physical switch in my routine must I press today to force monolethality? The absolute center. Recognizing there is nothing outside my output monitor, what level of isolation must I impose today to stop asking the screen to change? Death of seeking. Instead of hunting alliances, what parametric knob of my own density must I turn to the max so the environment orbits me? Monodensity. In which recent interaction did my signal sound weak and widened, and how can I re-execute it today with subsonic force? The journey fallacy. If the process is just friction for slaves, what bureaucratic step will I amputate today to route my will directly to the objective? Friction versus assimilation. Am I emitting the heat of someone on a treadmill or the absolute zero of the deity that already assimilated the universe? Master utility command. If the mono button is stuck on, what is the first unnegotiable order I must emit to prove the reign of polarity is over? Chapter 4. Bandwidth and Signal Degradation, the Death of Longing. In the immense, romantic, and deeply toxic architecture of the 3D simulation, the control system has designed an emotional trap so subtle that humanity has turned it into poetry. To the ordinary specimen, the framework has inoculated the belief that intense desire, hope, and longing are noble virtues. This is an energetic bleed. We shall call this acoustic masochism that annihilates the individual's gravity, the mirage of lack. Observe the radiography of the captive in his ecosystem of worshipping distance. The individual, operating under the deception of linear geometry, visualizes his supreme goal. Upon perceiving it as far away, he activates the slave protocol. The slave sighs for his dream. He desires it with desperation. He feels a physical void in his stomach because he does not have it. He emits a continuous signal of, I need you. Come to me. Mediocrity culture, cheap literature, and magical thinking applauds him. They tell him to wish with all his might. This is a thermodynamic trap. What this organism ignores with a forensic blindness is that longing is a mathematical declaration of poverty. In the command terminal of reality, the verb to desire compiles directly as current state, incomplete, possession, false, distance, true. Longing is not a bridge, it is the very confirmation of the abyss. When you desire with emotional intensity, you are shouting to conscious matter that you and your goal are separate entities. You are validating distance, and the simulation, a perfect mirror, obeys. It grants you more lack, so you can keep desiring. As long as you believe dreaming bridges the gap, you remain a weak signal emitter. The first cause never misses her own empire. She repudiates hope, murders longing, and discovers that the only way to materialize a massive object is not by asking the universe to bring it, but by assuming with icy brutality that the object is already welded to her own spine. The distance is zero because the possession is absolute. The physics of entanglement, copper resistance, and signal degradation. To dismantle the blasphemy of longing, we must analyze the flow of energy using electrical engineering and routing architecture in Ableton Live 12. In physical audio engineering, there is an unshakable law regarding analog transmission. When you send a signal through an unbalanced copper cable, it is subject to resistance. If the cable is 1 meter long, the signal arrives pure. But if you try to send it through 100 meters, a tragedy known as signal degradation occurs. High frequencies are lost. The sound becomes muddy. Worse, the long cable acts as an antenna for interference. By the end, the purity is destroyed, replaced by static. The prisoner of the labyrinth operates exactly like a 100-mile copper cable. When he longs for a distant goal, he tries to send an analog signal through the hologram of distance. But as it travels through months of waiting and bureaucracy, the signal experiences resistance. The friction of waiting degrades his will. When the desire finally tries to reach the reality server, it is no longer an order of conquest, it is a pathetic plea, a blurred murmur. The master architect assimilates this physics of disaster and repudiates the analog cable. He operates exclusively under the law of internal fiber optics and zero latency routing. In a superior production environment, you don't use physical cables to connect a massive synth to a channel. You use internal routing. With one click, the output of track A becomes the input of track B. Distance is exactly zero. There is no resistance, no attenuation, and no loss. The signal is 100% pure. Your mind is the motherboard. The goal is not out there at the end of a cable of suffering. The goal is a plug-in installed on your own hard drive. The architect opens the routing table of his own consciousness. He routes the colossal objective directly to his internal master bus. He materializes it in absolute proximity. The collapse of distance, parametric assimilation. The transmutation to the first cause demands the summary execution of hope. The architect assimilates that waiting for something to happen is yielding jurisdiction. He repudiates hope as the narcotic the system gives the slave to keep him from rebelling against lack. He assumes parametric assimilation. Imagine the architect near the end of a tactical siege. The framework tries to inject the virus of longing. Aren't you excited? Can't you wait for Friday to sign? The labyrinth wants him to emit heat and sweat hope to degrade his signal. The architect stops the thermal motors of his nervous system. He isolates his command console. He identifies the emotion of longing as invasive white noise and executes phase inversion. He does not allow his chest to feel a want for success. Instead, he turns the encoder of assimilation. He replaces the chaotic fire of hope with the dense black ice of ownership. In the 3D world, this manifests as an emotional absolute zero. His allies see no euphoria, only the same armored glass opacity. To the slave, this looks like disconnection. To quantum physics, this is the thermal signature of invulnerability. By not feeling euphoria, he destroys the illusion of temporal distance. Euphoria is for those who receive what was once far away, but if the goal was always entangled with you, materialization is not a surprise. The architect does not receive gifts. He updates his server screen. By killing longing, he cuts the oxygen to distance. The objective collapses upon him at fiber optic speed. Superconductivity and the absolute zero of desire. To sustain this transfer, the architect must master superconductivity. In physics, when you lower a material's temperature to absolute zero, electrical resistance drops to zero. Current can flow forever without losing energy. Without resistance, there is no friction. Without friction, power is infinite. The human slave operates at high temperatures. He is hot with emotions. He cries, longs, and despises. All that emotional temperature generates monstrous resistance. His energy burns away as social friction. The architect is a biological superconductor. He applies absolute zero to his desire structure. Purging longing does not mean abandoning the goal, it means purging friction. He becomes thermodynamicamente apathetic toward the when and how. By freezing the emotion of desire, his internal resistance drops to zero. The pure signal of I am hits the motherboard of the universe without losing a watt. The labyrinth breaks before this superconductivity. Automatons, used to dealing with sweaty humans who desire desperately, find an entity that demands the universe, but transpires zero need. In negotiation, he who desires more loses. The architect expropriates the room's power in absolute silence. Zero ping, the elimination of interstitial lag. The death of longing manifests in manipulating the universe's response time. In computing, ping is the latency for a data packet to reach the server and return. If your ping is high, you experience lag. You play in the past. The individual who longs lives with an existential ping of months or years. The architect executes zero ping. By establishing internal broadband routing and cooling his system to superconductivity, he eliminates the round trip. When his fingers press the tactile switch of a decision, when he dictates a territory as his, there is no wait time. He does not wait for results to feel like a king. He feels, acts, and breathes with the monarch's weight in the exact millisecond of the key press. Order and psychological assimilation occur in the same Planck frame. By removing the space between intent and ownership, conscious matter experiences a sync failure and is forced to update the hologram at light speed. Final calibration, internal fiber optic protocol, and the state of possession. To forge the broadband, zero latency core of a master architect, you must install a regime of parametric tyranny. Stop treating your goals as stars to which you send smoke signals. Treat them as local files on your hard drive that only require a double click. The process demands immediate intervention. Step 1. Longing audit, the analog friction scanner. I declare an absolute prohibition on using the psi as a method of conquest. Desiring from weakness is a confession of impotence. Identify the longing sensation in your chest as electrical resistance. It is your energy dissipating as useless heat. Step 2. Cutting the analog cable, the superconductivity command. Once the bleed is identified, do not desire harder. Turn off the emotional temperature. Enter the fold of the now. Cut the I want cable. Execute the descent to absolute zero. Transmute I need it into the board ownership of it is mine. Step 3. Local loop assimilation, the direct mapping. The signal no longer travels outside, it executes on the local host of your singularity. Open your routing matrix. Connect the output of your will to the input of your identity. Execute the 3D action without looking at the horizon. Execute blind. Drop the weight of your immutability on the labyrinth and force it to process a signal so clean and dense that the hologram cracks. The simulation yields the crown to the only organism that had the cruelty not to beg for it. You do not seek the throne. You are the coordinate where the throne materializes. 11 reflection commands for the death of longing. Resistance audit. In which goal am I losing bandwidth by allowing longing to burn my energy instead of cold discipline? Analog cable cut. What romantic vocabulary, I dream of, I hope, will I uninstall today to purge my network latency? Local host mapping. If the empire is on my identity's hard drive, why do I ask society's server for permission to access my files? Euphoria. Extirpation. How would my gravitational weight change if I showed the monarch's boredom instead of the predator's hunger? Absolute zero of desire. What fear of losing or desperation to win must I freeze today to achieve tactical superconductivity? Zero ping. Recognizing wait time is a lie. What action will I execute today while feeling the absolute weight of victory already achieved? Assimilation versus pursuit. Am I emitting the wet signal of a pursuer or the dry signal of one who collapses the horizon onto his keyboard? Thermal friction. In which relationship is my hope for approval degrading my signal, and how do I cut that routing today? The journey's death. If the goal and the action are superimposed frames, what preparation step can I annihilate today to fire at zero latency? Fundamental ownership frequency. How does the immovable sub-bass of "this territory was already assimilated" resonate in my sternum? Broadband command. What is the first unnegotiable directive I must emit today without a single gram of doubt, hope, or attenuation? Chapter 5. Phase velocity, acoustic teleportation. In the immense, dense, and bureaucratic architecture of the three-dimensional simulation, the control system has encoded a physical restriction designed specifically to exhaust the will of its prisoners. To the ordinary specimen, the framework has inoculated an absolute belief in the dictatorship of inertia. We shall call this pathology of topographical slavery, this primitive terror that forces the individual to drag their own weight across the map, the mirage of biological inertia. Observe the radiography of the captive before the map of their ambitions. The individual visualizes a territory they wish to conquer. The labyrinth immediately projects the friction screen. It reminds the prisoner that their body is a block of flesh and bone, subject to gravity and exhaustion. It says, to reclaim that territory, you must move your physical mass. You must travel, cross borders, and present your biological body as collateral. Under this hypnosis, the prisoner accepts the toll of the flesh. They assume their power is strictly limited to the coordinates where their shoes are located. If their body is not in the room, they believe they have no voice. In the eyes of the culture of effort, this individual is a tireless worker. The cognitive trap has closed over their execution engine, guaranteeing that their bandwidth is consumed in logistical friction before even uttering their first tactical word. What this organism ignores is that the biological body is the slowest and most obsolete transmission vehicle in the entire matrix. Physical matter is heavy. It has inertia. It suffers aerodynamic resistance. As long as humans believe they need to move their biomass through 3D mud to begin to rule, they will always be late to their own victories. They will live panting at the door of the empire, blind to the fact that the first cause never moves its body. She projects her source code through the network, penetrates the territory as an immaterial wave, and when her physical body finally crosses the threshold, the room had already surrendered hours before to the acoustic impact of her arrival. The signal always precedes the mass. The physics of entanglement, group velocity versus phase velocity. To dismantle the blasphemy of physical inertia, we must dissect movement using wave mechanics and signal propagation. In wave physics, energy and information do not move like solid bullets, they move as wave packets. Within a wave packet, there are two distinct velocities, group velocity and phase velocity. Group velocity, VBG$, is the speed at which the envelope of the wave packet moves. It is the speed at which physical energy, matter, and mass are transported. Mathematically, your biological body is group velocity. It is your flesh, your bones, and your passport. It moves slowly. It is subject to the limits of relativity, air friction, and the delays of the framework. But hidden in the equation, there is an anomaly designed for the gods. Phase velocity, VP. Phase velocity is the rate at which the phase of a single constituent frequency propagates. It carries pure information. Its formula is the thermodynamic brutality of phase velocity is that in certain anomalous media, it can exceed the speed of light. Why? Because the phase has no mass. It does not have to ask inertia for permission. The master architect has assimilated this physics. He repudiates the slowness of group velocity. He knows that if he sends his physical body to fight a battle, the battle will be heavy. Therefore, the architect executes acoustic teleportation. Your I am, your magnetic reputation, is not biomass. It is pure phase velocity. When the architect decides to reclaim a territory, he does not buy a plane ticket immediately. He anchors his center of gravity. He enters the zero latency of the fold of the now. He positions his hands on his 60% mechanical keyboard. From his anechoic chamber, he adjusts the pitch of his will. He fires the wave of his authority with a phase velocity that travels faster than 3D light. The phase of his identity pierces space, penetrates the minds of his adversaries, and alters the room's acoustic code. The information wave saturates the negative space before he moves a muscle. He is there. He is. The collapse of distance, cross-border routing, and parametric expropriation. The transmutation to the omnipresent first cause demands the separation between intention and flesh. The architect assimilates that geographic borders are holographic walls designed to intimidate those who believe they are made exclusively of carbon. He repudiates customs. He assumes sovereignty of phase. Imagine the architect entering the epicenter of expansive monetization. His content requires extracting dividends, but the local financial system is a saturated channel. The labyrinth shows him a horizon, the need to open international bank accounts to process elite capital. He refuses the friction. The individual would believe they must travel physically. Their group velocity gets stuck in the mud of biomass logistics. The architect stops the anxiety engine. He does not move his body. He remains in his chair, wrapped in absolute zero. He opens his mental Ableton Live 12 workstation. He locates the remote financial node on the global map. He knows conscious matter does not ask for passports, it responds to the densest signal. The architect executes cross-border routing. With hands anchored on his Arturia Minilab 3, he turns the encoders of his intellectual aggressiveness. He prepares the legal structure and servers from the shadow of his keyboard. He fires his phase velocity. His sovereignty code teleports acoustically through the global network. The doors of the vault open thousands of miles away, without his body having crossed the frame of his own door. The labyrinth fractures. The border system was designed to trap flesh, but it is useless against code. When your phase travels faster than light, the notion of country becomes a relic for slaves who believe they need permission to move the ocean's water from one glass to another. Acoustic dephasing, preparing hostile ground. Phase velocity is the definitive military weapon to subjugate face-to-face interactions. When the slave enters a room full of adversaries, he arrives scared. He tries to build authority from scratch, fighting the hostile acoustics. The slave gasps all his energy trying to warm the territory. The architect executes acoustic dephasing. Days or hours before the physical meeting, the architect is already sending his phase velocity toward that room. He sends the code of his reputation. He condenses his absolute zero into a zero latency email or a deathly silence during previous calls. He projects a radioactive shadow over those who will receive him. The enemy room becomes saturated with his phase. Adversaries begin to feel the architect's gravity before seeing him. They adjust their expectations. The atmospheric pressure drops under the weight of the architect's order. When the time arrives, the architect mobilizes his group velocity. His physical body walks down the hall and opens the door. But the miracle has already occurred. He does not have to earn respect because his phase colonized the room 48 hours ago. The acoustics are already equalized in his favor. Adversaries do not see a man. They see the physical manifestation of a thermodynamic force that had already brought them to their knees in the invisible plane. The body simply arrives to sign the surrender that phase velocity already drafted. The war was annihilated in the code dimension. Phase synchronization, annulling transit friction. Acoustic teleportation requires extreme parametric control over the internal state during group velocity travel. Even if you send your phase ahead, eventually your body must move. The prisoner hates airports and waiting. He suffers the friction because his mind is tied to the slowness of his feet. The architect executes phase synchronization in motion. He assimilates that a plane cabin or a customs waiting room are mobile anechoic chambers. They are the fold of the now in transit. When the architect moves his body, he does not suffer because he withdraws his consciousness from the vehicle. While the carbon container moves at the pathetic speed of human machines, the architect retracts his energy toward the central hard drive. He uses those hours to fire phase waves toward his next 50 targets. The body is stuck in a seat, but the monarch's mind is turning infinite encoders. He types closing brackets over entire empires. The architect annuls displacement friction by understanding that his true self never travels. His self is the entire network. The body is only a probe sent to collect physical info that the central server had already conquered hours before. Final calibration, phase emission protocol, and advanced routing. To forge the hyperdense, zero-latency core of a master architect, you must install a regime of parametric tyranny over how you approach the universe's logistics. Stop treating your physical presence as the only tool of conquest. Treat it as the wax seal at the end of a document your phase already wrote. The process demands an immediate intervention, executing the phase emission protocol. Step 1. Disconnection of false mass, death of slave logistics. I declare an absolute prohibition on using physical tiredness or geographic barriers as an excuse. Your body is only the pet of your code. Audit your plans. What territory have you paused because you believe you have to be there physically? Identify that topographic lie. Recognize that you are limiting your power to the pathetic speed of your own feet. Assume the humiliation of ceding authority to a brick wall or a bureaucrat. Step 2. Phase velocity shot, cross-border routing. Once the barrier is identified, do not walk toward it. Hack it from the fold of the now. Position your hands on your 60% keyboard. Locate the remote objective. Mute the channel of your biological body. Condense your down talk. Route that signal directly to the objective's server. Execute the digital orders and the weight of your reputation through the network. Fire your phase. Feel the cruelty of knowing your order just arrived on the other side of the world while you remain comfortably seated in absolute zero. Step 3. Arrival of the shell. Surrender of the room. The hack materializes when your body enters the equation, not to fight, but to rule. When group velocity brings your body to the coordinate, do so with majestic apathy. Do not give away scared slave smiles. Enter in absolute silence. Occupy the space with the density of one who knows the room has been breathing your radioactive phase for days. Sit and watch conscious matter fold around you, surrendering to the organism that understood war was never about muscles or miles, but about code and latency. The room is now your server. Or 11 reflection commands for acoustic teleportation. Inertia audit. What empire conquest am I delaying today under the holographic excuse that my physical body cannot be there yet? Mass decoupling. If my phase velocity is infinite, what digital command must I send today to colonize the adversary's mind before I show up? Cross-border expropriation. Recognizing global capital has no passport. What financial structure will I root today from my desk's darkness? Boardroom dephasing. Before my next confrontation, how will I equalize the room's terror by sending my reputation 48 hours in advance? Shell muting. In my next transit, flight or wait, how will I turn off my impatient biomass sensors to turn that seat into my conquest's epicenter? Teleportation of I am. Am I allowing the slowness of group velocity, body, to justify the laziness of phase velocity, identity? Distance assimilation. In which interaction am I trying to warm up the room in person instead of freezing it via the network before arriving? Zero latency routing. What gatekeeper will I ignore today, sending my will's code directly to the motherboard of the final decision maker? Border death. What geographic limit has been lying to me, and how will I hack its servers today with a pitch of absolute authority? Friction versus projection. Instead of moving my legs toward the goal, what psychological density must I inject in the fold to pull the goal to my chair? Acoustic invasion command. What is the exact code typed in my 60% silence that I will send today so remote reality kneels before my steps? Chapter 6. The Doppler effect of fear. In the immense, sadistic, and mathematically perfect architecture of the 3D simulation, the control system has encoded a final defense mechanism, a definitive firewall designed to annihilate the few prisoners who manage to survive the initial illusion of distance. To the ordinary specimen, the framework inoculates a psychological neurotoxin. We shall call this pathology of terminal self-sabotage, this primitive terror that detonates right on the border of victory, the mirage of imminence. Observe the radiography of the captive in the theater of operations. The individual has worked for years. He has reached the point of no return. Point Z is now breathing down his neck. The slave has the pen in hand, a millimeter from signing the contract. He is about to press the execution button to launch his corporation globally. And then, in that exact and microscopic millisecond of absolute proximity, the operating system of his brain experiences a catastrophic failure. The labyrinth activates the siren. The prisoner is assaulted by a deafening noise. The consequences of his success are magnified into monsters. His mind floods with panic calculations. If I sign this, there is no going back. If I win this power, I will lose my identity. What if I am an imposter? The terror becomes shrill, piercing, and unbearable. Under this pressure, the slave does the unthinkable. He drops the pen. He takes a step back. He invents a logistic excuse or an interpersonal fight to justify his retreat. He self-sabotages. He returns to the mediocre security of point A, convinced that the goal was too dangerous or that it wasn't the right time. In the eyes of the herd and cheap compassion, this individual is prudent. The system pats him on the back, telling him he did well to listen to his intuition. confusing the instinct of cowardice with divine wisdom. The cognitive trap has closed, ensuring 99% of biomass dies of suffocation on the shore of victory. What this organism ignores is that the terror was not a warning, it was a simple acoustic illusion. The objective did not become more dangerous, responsibility did not mutate. While humans believe fear is a sign to stop, they remain scared reactors. Absolute monarchs never break. They accelerate through the high-pitched friction. The physics of entanglement, the Doppler effect, and the acoustics of panic. To dismantle self-sabotage, we must dissect perception using acoustic physics and wave propagation. In the physical world, sound travels in concentric waves. If you and the source are still, you hear the real signal. But if you and the source approach each other at high speed, a distortion occurs, the Doppler effect. As the distance shortens rapidly, the sound waves in front of the source are compressed. The wavelength becomes shorter and the frequency shoots up. The sound becomes sharp, piercing, and shrill. Think of an ambulance siren approaching you. The tone rises dizzyingly until it becomes a deafening shriek at the cross-impact. In classical physics, the observed frequency, F-do, is governed by the equation Left, frac 8, farless. Your ambition is the source, V is so. When you were far from your goal, you perceived it as a romantic dream. The sound reached you as a low, safe echo. Dreaming does not hurt, it has a pleasant frequency. But then, you collapsed the distance. You, V-well, began to approach the goal at devastating tactical speed. As the distance shortens aggressively, the conscious matter of the universe experiences the Doppler effect. Atmospheric pressure compresses the waves of responsibility and identity change. The frequency becomes acute. The environment screams. Your biological circuits interpret this high frequency as a lethal threat. The pitch of fear becomes so shrill that the slave lets go of the reins. The master architect, however, understands the math. He knows the goal is the same. The fundamental frequency, $, of victory, remains intact. The shriek in his mind is pure proximity static. It is the friction of 3D air compressing because his immense mass is colliding with the target at terminal velocity. The architect does not fear the siren. He uses it as ballistic telemetry. He recognizes that the shriek is the empirical confirmation that distance is dead. The collapse of distance, the immutability of static pitch. The transmutation to the first cause demands the manual cancellation of emotional pitch shifting. The architect assimilates that altering your posture due to the noise of speed is yielding to aerodynamic resistance. He repudiates frequency variation. He assumes the command of acoustic ignorance and static pitch. Imagine the architect 24 hours before a maneuver that will expropriate the market. The framework injects the Doppler effect. The noise of "what if it goes wrong?" and the hysteria of subordinates reach decibels that would break a mortal's eardrum. The architect stops the analog processing of emotion. He isolates his 60% console. In his mind's Ableton Live 12 environment, he identifies the environment reception channel. The labyrinth is trying to perform a pitch bend upward, generating an unbearable shriek. The reactive individual tries to lower the volume. The architect does not. He locks the pitch. Using his infinite encoder, he applies a zero-latency pitch correction algorithm to his identity. He forces his biological system to operate on a static fundamental tone. In the boardroom, he anchors his weight to the pelvic floor. While the biomass runs sweating, he emits a command of statics. When he speaks, his voice comes out with a sub-bass density so compressed and alien to the surrounding panic that the Doppler effect crashes against a wall of tungsten. He assumes tactical deafness. This immutability creates an acoustic anchor. Conscious matter, unable to bend his tuning, is forced to sync with him. The breakout threshold, breaking the sound barrier. Domain is consolidated by the final ballistic maneuver, breaking the sound barrier. In supersonic aerodynamics, when an aircraft accelerates toward Mach 1, the Doppler effect reaches its extreme. Waves emit forward but cannot escape the plane. They overlap, creating a wall of hypercompressed air, the barrier. Crossing this is a violent thermodynamic event. The aircraft experiences brutal vibrations and deafening noise. The novice pilot, terrified the ship will disintegrate, decelerates. By slowing down, he stays trapped behind the barrier, pushing the wall of sound forever, consuming fuel without achieving escape. The labyrinth prisoner does exactly this. When fear, the compressed air wall, shakes his life, the slave lets off the gas. The master architect, inhabiting the fold of the now, executes the direct injection overdrive. When turbulence threatens his ego, he doesn't let go of the execution key. He applies more weight. He accelerates directly against the wall. And then he crosses Mach 1. Physical reality responds with a sonic boom. The architect breaks the barrier of his old identity. The shock wave destroys the glass ceiling of his environment. But the most beautiful miracle happens for the architect inside the cockpit. In the millisecond he breaks the barrier and assimilates the goal. What happens to the deafening shriek of the Doppler effect? It disappears. Absolute silence falls. By traveling faster than the speed of panic, the waves of fear are left behind. They can no longer catch him. He is in supersonic flight. He realizes the anxiety of 10 seconds ago was simply the friction of an atmosphere he left far below his boots. In the radioactive stillness of the stratosphere, he observes how prisoners are still scared by the noise of his boom. He has colonized the territory, proving true peace is found by accelerating through. Extirpating the right to backtrack, sealing the cockpit. To sustain flight and prevent biological instinct from sabotaging the motor, the architect must purge the right to backtrack, or Plan B. The slave always leaves a door open to flee if the noise gets too loud. He doesn't burn the ships. The labyrinth encourages this cowardice under the guise of risk management. The architect installs the hermetic sealing of the flight cockpit. He assimilates that a safety net is the mathematical guarantee you will fall. He operates from a 60% keyboard precisely because escape keys have been suppressed. When he initiates the final attack, he executes a purge command. He burns the back door. In the fold of the now, he biologically forbids himself the option of not crossing the finish line. This elimination of alternatives generates immense thermal pressure, but it is vectorial. It can only propel him forward. Anxiety loses jurisdiction. Fear is no longer an advisor. Fear becomes simply the ambient temperature of the cabin, an inert datum. The architect is thermodynamically unstoppable because his motherboard is configured, so the only path to survival is the absolute domination of the barrier in front of him. There is no reverse. There is only the breakthrough. Final calibration, static pitch protocol and wall piercing. To forge the supersonic core of a master architect, you must today install a regime of absolute tyranny over your response to last-minute panic. Stop treating imminence anxiety as a divine warning. Treat it as air friction against the titanium prow of your will. The process demands a ballistic intervention. Step 1. Frequency shift detection, identifying the Doppler. I declare an absolute prohibition on interpreting the fear of imminent success as intuition. Biomass intuition is just encoded cowardice. Audit your empire. Identify the project you fled from just as you were about to win. That was Doppler. Step 2. Master pitch lock. Command immutability. Once the fraud is identified, do not try to calm the world's noise. The world is programmed to shriek. You must silence your own reaction. Enter the fold of the now. Locate the encoder of your downtalk. Lock the pitch, remain a stone regardless of the economy. Step 3. Acceleration to Mach 1, breaking the sound barrier. The hack is sealed by injecting fuel into the afterburner. When the fear wall threatens, seal the cockpit. Press the execute button, sign the document, launch the operation. Exercise kinetic violence on the wall of your old identity. Cross the sound barrier of the simulation. Enter the radioactive, abyssal and frozen silence of supersonic flight. Claim the throne reserved for the organism with the glorious psychopathy to accelerate when everyone else is begging for the brakes. You are the explosion that redefines the map. Add reflection commands to collapse distance. Self-sabotage audit. From what point Z have I retreated at the last centimeter, justifying it with the shriek of imminent panic? Doppler decryption. If the goal emits a constant dry signal, what external noise am I allowing to compress against my ears and alter my tuning? Pitch immutability. In this week's chaos, how will I maintain my monolithic sub-bass downtalk and refuse to let my voice tremble with biomass pitch? Plan B, extirpation. What backup contact or mediocre excuse will I incinerate today to force myself to break the sound barrier? Turbulence baptism. Am I willing to cross the hyper-compressed air wall, imposter terror, assuming my shaking structure is the prelude to coronation? Tactical deafness. In my next power signing, how will I deactivate my reception monitors to remain deaf to the hysteria of allies? 60% keyboard lock. Recognizing I lack backspace keys, what unnegotiable zero latency command will I type today, forcing my body to follow the phase? Supersonic silence. If supreme peace is found only after piercing panic, what high-voltage friction will I traverse today to enjoy the sterile void? I am. Isolation. How will I isolate the math purity of my ambition so the Doppler effect of society doesn't introduce white noise in my master channel? Acceleration command. What parameter of intellectual aggression or financial capital will I double to push against the wall of sound? Wall assimilation. What dense, pitiless order will I emit today so the holographic fear wall collapses, revealing the Empire's throne was always there? Chapter 7. Direct routing. The end of intermediaries. The spatial hologram, the mirage of the chain of command. In the immense, intricate and suffocating architecture of the three-dimensional simulation, the control system has encoded an algorithm of attrition so perverse that the biomass defends it as if it were a natural law. To the ordinary specimen, the framework has inoculated the illusion of hierarchy. We shall call this pathology of bureaucratic separation, this topographical lie that multiplies the distance between intention and the collapse of reality, the mirage of the chain of command. Observe the radiography of the captive. The individual conceives an elite objective. However, the labyrinth projects an immense glass wall. The system whispers, "You cannot access power directly. To reach capital, you must convince the banker. To reach the audience, you must please the editor. There are gatekeepers." Under this hypnosis, the prisoner accepts his place at the base of the pyramid. He assumes distance is hierarchical. He begins the hallway of humiliation. He gives his time to convince mediocre intermediaries to grant him permission to advance. In the eyes of corporate culture, this individual is a team player who respects processes. The cognitive trap has closed, ensuring his bandwidth evaporates at the toll of bureaucracy. What this organism ignores is that the chain of command is an optical illusion. Intermediaries have no real power. They are simple nodes of friction, filler programs designed to consume excess energy. Absolute monarchs never ask permission. They understand network architecture, cut the cable, and establish zero-latency routing. The physics of entanglement, network latency and signal routing. To dismantle the blasphemy of spatial bureaucracy, we must dissect distance using telecommunications engineering and signal routing in an environment like Ableton Live 12. In audio engineering, the path sound follows is called signal flow. The goal is to reach the master output with the least distortion possible. The production novice commits the routing error of Chronos. He passes his signal through a dozen aux buses. He sends it to a group, then an external processor, then an effects bus. Each hop introduces 3 lethal diseases: gain loss, coloration, distortion, and accumulated latency. In computer networks, the equation for total transmission time is T1 sum, n delta, T plus I delta, T, where $10 is the number of intermediaries. Each hop adds a mathematical delay. The slave's will is subjected to this. He wants to monetize, but passes through the obus of a decaying bank. The master architect assimilates signal flow and repudiates serial connection. He operates under the law of direct out, external routing. In Ableton Live, you can tell any track to ignore the master bus and all intermediate groups. You select ext, out. In that millisecond, the software bypasses the hierarchy. Topographical and bureaucratic distance collapses to zero. Your consciousness is the synthesizer. The guardians of the labyrinth are the auxiliary buses. When the architect decides to collapse distance, he does not beg intermediaries. He rewrites his routing table. He assigns the output of his ambition to the world. He fires the signal. The order of the first cause travels below the visible network, piercing holographic layers without being detected by the radars of mediocrity, impacting directly on the motherboard of the final result. The collapse of distance, node expropriation and cross-border routing. The transmutation to the fluid majesty of the first cause demands the amputation of the local system. The architect assimilates that playing by the intermediaries' rules is accepting the sabotage of your work. He repudiates bureaucratic customs. He understands true distance is measured in the number of permissions asked. He assumes topographic sovereignty, cross-border routing, and parametric expropriation of capital. Imagine the architect producing conscious matter, art or engineering with magnetic value. The geographic labyrinth tries to impose the mirage of the chain of command. The local system acts as a damaged, obsolete router. It demands that monetization passes through its channels. They say, "We will process your capital. We will charge friction in taxes. We will impose latency." For the slave, the goal retreats. Distance becomes immense because it is blocked. The slave complains, but submits his signal to the faulty routing. The architect stops the rendering engine of submission. He does not fight the local bank. Fighting an intermediary validates its existence. The architect, in the sterile vacuum of the fold of the now, opens his command terminal. He executes zero-latency cross-border routing. His hands slide over his 60% keyboard. Instead of asking permission, he designs a receptor node in a foreign jurisdiction. He opens an elite offshore account. He alters the source code of his platforms. In the drop-down menu of his reality, he changes audio to high-security cross-border node. In the 3D world, this decision generates no noise, but the physics of distance has been slaughtered. The architect publishes, the audience reacts, value is generated, and monetization flows directly to the foreign node. It evades the electrical resistance and tolls of the local system entirely. The architect has proven that money and power were not far. They were trapped behind an intermediary he just amputated. The distance reduces to Planck time. He sits in his chair, wrapped in absolute zero, watching capital feed his offshore vault, laughing at the gatekeepers guarding an empty bridge. The API of consciousness, communication without GUI. To amputate intermediaries with surgical cleanliness, the architect must master the application programming interface, API, and apply it to his cybernetics. In software, humans interact via a graphical user interface, GUI. They click buttons and wait for animations. The GUI is slow, designed for the biomass. Or, when software speaks to software, it uses an API. This allows pure data exchange in milliseconds, in silence, without buttons. It is direct communication in the network's underground. The slave interacts with conscious matter through society's GUI, fake smiles and social conventions. The architect executes via the API of consciousness. He assimilates that minds are controlled by data packets received in the subconscious. He bypasses the need to please. When he needs to force a decision, he does not waste bandwidth smiling or justifying. He assumes the monolith posture. He transmits the frequency of I am directly to the limbic system of others. He speaks code to code. The biomass's conscious defenses cannot process this attack because it isn't wrapped in social rules. The instruction jumps firewalls and executes. The opponent's ego is bypassed. Conscious matter simply obeys. The death of the agent, the auto-consolidation of power. The last bastion of distance is the belief that you are not technical or valid enough to do direct routing yourself. The system says, you need an expert. You need a manager. The architect executes auto-consolidation. He repudiates the delegation of sovereignty. To give your code's communication to an external agent is to introduce lethal latency. If the agent doubts, your empire doubts. The architect invests his nights learning the syntax of pure domination. He becomes the start and end of signal flow. By assuming 100% of the load, he eliminates the last intermediary. The wave of his will leaves his core and hits the framework without losing decibels. This total absence of intermediaries grants him a response speed, zero ping, that the competition, stuck waiting for their lawyers and managers to agree, can never match. He is a lean, unbuffered machine. Final calibration, auxiliary extirpation protocol and master out. To forge the hyper-dense, unfiltered core of a master architect, you must install a regime of parametric tyranny. Stop treating success like a VIP club guarded by bouncers you must bribe. Treat it as a server terminal you can access remotely, injecting your authority code in the silence of dawn. The process demands immediate intervention, executing the auxiliary extirpation protocol. Step 1. Parasitic bus detection, intermediation scanner. I declare an absolute prohibition on using the excuse that you are waiting for approval. Waiting is a confession you gave your volume control to a third party. Audit your signal flow. Identify the monetary or artistic goal that is stuck. Who is in the middle? Is it a local institution, a boss, a mediocre partner? Recognize that entity as a faulty plugin, degrading your signal and adding latency to your timeline. Step 2. Group output annulment. Bypass command. Do not try to improve the intermediary. You cannot optimize a parasite's code. You must bypass it. Position your hands on your console. Enter the fold of the now. Configure your signal output. Execute cross-border or interstitial routing. Switch off the intermediaries channel with glacial coldness. Step 3. Direct injection, dry signal overdrive. The supreme hack is sealed by crushing the final goal with pure, unattenuated signal. When you decide to publishing conscious matter, do it through direct routing. Execute from the function layer of your 60% keyboard. Do not look back. Let the dry signal hit the 3D reality server. Receiving an order not softened by cowards, conscious matter will react with violence in your favor. You will feel the glass wall disintegrate, proving power was never a granted privilege. It was a raw signal the universe plays when the operator plugs in. 11 reflection commands for direct routing. Local friction audit. Which institution or individual is operating as a damaged router, taxing my purest signal? Cross-border mapping. Which remote, high-efficiency node, offshore account, must I open today to route my monetization? Guardian identification. In which goal am I humiliating myself by asking the security guard for permission instead of the CEO? Agent extirpation. What technical aspect have I delegated out of cowardice that I must master tonight in my vault? Approval. Bypass. Whose applause am I waiting for before publishing, and how do I cut that OS cable today? API versus GUI command. How will I deactivate the slave need to smile, GUI, to transmit my zero absolute directly to the limbic brain, API? Intermediary asphyxiation. If I stop feeding the blocker with my attention, how much bandwidth do I recover for the bypass? Dry execution signal. What unnegotiable action will I take today where the intermediary's response will be irrelevant? The process illusion. What social protocol have I assumed is a physical law when it is just overwritable code? Zero latency sovereignty. What project will I consolidate today by assuming 100% of the tactical supply chain? Master output detonation. What filter-free command will I type today, ordering conscious matter to surrender its resources to my hands? Chapter 8. The Gravity of Magnetism, the Black Hole of Desire. In the immense, noisy and humiliating topography of the three-dimensional simulation, the control system has designed a pathetic choreography to keep prisoners perpetually exhausted. To the ordinary specimen, the framework has inoculated an absolute belief in the virtue of pursuit. This kinetic mirage annihilates dignity and voltage. We shall call this pathology of logistical attrition the mirage of the hunt. Observe the radiography of the captive in his daily ecosystem. The individual, operating under obsolete linear geometry and the morality of scarcity, visualizes the resources he needs: clients, capital, high-value partners, or foreign financial infrastructure. The labyrinth immediately projects the friction screen. It injects a toxic cultural mandate known as hustle culture. The system screams, "Go out and get it. Chase your clients. Call 100 doors. Sell your soul begging for an offshore account. You are the hunter, and the world is your prey. If you don't run, you starve. Under the hypnosis of this mirage, the prisoner accepts the role of the hunting dog. He begins to run. He sends pleading emails, chases partners who ignore him, and runs after a financial horizon that is always one step out of reach. To the eyes of anesthetized society, this individual is proactive, a warrior who doesn't quit. The thermodynamic trap has closed over his source code, guaranteeing that his kinetic energy evaporates in the very act of trying to bridge the distance. What this organism ignores is the first law of predation in the power ecosystem. Pursuit is the mathematical admission of mass inferiority. It is a confession of weakness. When you pursue something, you are emitting an undeniable acoustic and thermal signature. You are declaring that the object of your desire has more value, speed, and power than you. In the physics of motion, if you run after money, money runs away from you. If you chase an elite client, they detect your low gravitational density. As long as the human being believes that conquest requires sweat, cheap persuasion, and frantic hunting, he will remain a low-mass particle orbiting other people's suns. He will live humiliating himself, blind to the fact that absolute monarchs never run. They understand the physics of spatial curvature and stay in absolute zero. They become black holes of infinite density, forcing entities, capital, and empires to slide down their gravitational slope until they collide violently against the palm of their hands. The physics of entanglement, space curvature, and sub-bass frequency. To dismantle the blasphemy of pursuit, we must abandon the biology of predator and prey and dissect the mechanics of attraction using Einstein's general relativity and sub-bass engineering. The biomass operates under Newtonian physics, where gravity is erroneously perceived as an invisible pulling force like a rope. Under this false premise, the slave believes he must throw a lasso of persuasion to catch his goals. But the architect operates under Einstein's field equations. In general relativity, gravity is the geometric deformation of the fabric of space-time itself. The fundamental equation is G delta psi lambda, G andata efrak, T dataris. In this syntax of the universe, the right side, T dollars, represents the energy density and mass of matter. The left side, G dollars, represents the curvature of space. John Archibald Wheeler translated it perfectly. Matter tells space how to curve, space tells matter how to move. Stars do not chase planets, they just exist. Because their mass is monstrously immense, their existence in absolute zero sinks the trampoline of space-time. Everything passing near them has no choice but to roll down the slope of that curvature toward the center of mass. Your identity, your I am, possesses a thermodynamic mass. The slave has the mass of sand. The architect is the gravitational singularity. He repudiates logistical movement. He assembles that going out to network or begging for monetization tools in foreign ecosystems is reducing his mass to a grain of dust. The architect executes gravitational immutability. We can map this in the acoustics of Ableton Live 12. The prisoner tries to communicate using high frequencies, treble. The desperate cry and the needy seller operate at 10,000 Hz. Treble frequencies are weak, directional, and dissipate quickly. The architect saturates the sub-bass frequency. Imagine a pure 808 bass at 30 Hz. It doesn't chase you, it invades and submits you. The sub-bass emanates from the center and makes the fluid of everyone present vibrate, regardless of where they are hidden. When the architect needs to conquer, he doesn't use the high frequency of pursuit. He anchors his presence and turns on the sub-bass oscillator of his authority. He doesn't ask, he simply is. He is with a density so heavy that the fabric of society curves around him. Foreign financial institutions and elite clients suddenly experience a gravitational anomaly. The slope of space-time tilts, and those resources begin to slide toward the architect's center, surrendering to a monarch who never left his chair. The collapse of distance, the anchor and the hunter's paralysis. The transmutation to the magnetic deity of the first cause demands the most anti-intuitive act, the absolute will to remain paralyzed while the world screams at you to run. The architect assimilates that reactive movement is the bleeding of your own gravity. He repudiates the urgency of the labyrinth. He understands that if you step forward out of panic, You're informing the matrix that the opportunity is larger than you. He assumes topographic sovereignty, the hunter's paralysis, and parametric anchoring. Imagine the architect in a resource void. The society screams, "Go after them, move or you die." The reactive individual would obey. He would lose all his mass in the attempt. The architect executes zero-latency paralysis. In the millisecond panic demands he run, he sinks his feet into the floor, anchors his diaphragm, and blocks all kinetic signal output. He does not send the follow-up message. He stays quiet. In that radioactive silence, the architect operates his master console. He knows that if he pursues, both enter the low-resolution cat-and-mouse game. By staying sociopathically still, he commits heresy against the labyrinth's rules. The external target, client, institution, experiences a phase collapse. They were programmed to flee while you pursued. By stopping, the vacuum you leave creates a low-pressure zone. Thermodynamic physics abhors a vacuum. Since you do not move toward them, the gravity of your silence and lack of need begins to suck the oxygen out of the room. The client begins to doubt. Why is he not chasing me? Does he have a bigger empire waiting? Fear of loss changes sides. By anchoring your mass and emitting 0 decibels of need, space-time curves. The target, terrified by your cold density, begins to approach you. They call. They approve the contract. They facilitate the bureaucracy. The architect did not win by arguing louder. He won by deforming the geometry of the room. He proved that the entity with the cold blood to stop in the middle of the hunt, turn on the sub-bass of his I am, and look at the abyss without blinking, is the only entity to which the universe pays tribute. Extirpating need, zero-friction magnetism. To sustain this density, the architect must purge his hardware of the emotion that ruins any magnetic field. Neediness. The slave can pretend not to care, but if his mind is screaming, "Please approve me," the motherboard detects it. Need is white noise. If the star's core is scared, it has no mass. The architect installs the zero-friction filter. He assembles that true gravity is not faked, it is compiled. When he stops the hunt, he does it by assuming the literal death of the external option. He extirpates need by accepting the worst-case scenario in the fold of the now and reducing it to mathematical ashes. If the bank rejects the opening, the capital will find another sink. My empire does not depend on a node. I am the master server. By executing this code without self-deception, the thermal friction of fear falls to 0. The architect reaches gravitational superconductivity. He no longer needs the world. He becomes a self-sufficient closed system. This absolute disconnection from need is the most magnetic anomaly of the simulation. Conscious matter, used as a floor rag by millions of needy beggars, becomes paralyzed and fascinated by an organism that operates without asking for anything. Reality falls in love. It surrenders at his feet, throwing resources and cross-border capital, not because he screamed for them, but because he is the only entity with the optical, acoustic, and gravitational density sufficient to hold them without trembling. He is the immovable object that commands the moving universe. Final calibration, density protocol, and inertial attraction. To forge the hyperdense core of a master architect, you must today install a regime of topographical tyranny. Stop treating the universe as a jungle where you must chase rabbits. Start treating it as an elastic mesh that will sink and bring planets to you only if you dare to become heavy enough. The process demands immediate intervention on your pursuit reflex, executing the density protocol. Step 1. Pursuit audit, mass loss detection. I declare an absolute prohibition on using kinetic energy to convince the labyrinth to give you what belongs to you. Pleading is the loss of gravity. Audit your empire. Behind what or whom are you running? Identify that client you follow up on excessively. Identify your role as the pursuer. Assume the technical humiliation of knowing that by running after them, you grant them God status and reduce yourself to the mass of a slave asteroid. Step 2. Ballistic brake. Collapse in the fold of the now. Do not try to run slower. Apply an absolute thermodynamic brake. Position your hands on your 60% console. In the millisecond anxiety demands that email or call, Execute hunter's paralysis. Sink into your chair. Do not move. Accept the silence. Hold your breath and look from the vacuum of the fold of the now. Expropriate need by assuming that if you must run to retain a resource, the resource is defective and does not deserve your bandwidth. Step 3. Sub-bass overdrive, black hole activation. Now turn on the magnet to curve 3D space. From absolute paralysis, transfer all mental energy to your gravitational immutability. Think of your own density. Review your steel discipline and your market knowledge. Recognize the weight of the beast you have built. Turn on the sub-bass frequency. The room will curve toward you. Maintain dead eye contact. 11 reflection commands for gravitational magnetism. Pursuit audit. What elite resource, monetization, client, status, am I sabotaging by running after it, revealing my core lacks mass? Sub-bass mapping. Am I operating at the high, desperate frequency of the slave or emanating the slow, omnidirectional down-talk of the monarch? Tactical paralysis. In which negotiation will I apply a dry break today, forcing the other's thermal need to push them into my domain? Need extirpation. If the contract collapses today, am I anchored in absolute zero to accept it without my heart rate increasing? Room curvature. When entering a hostile space, how will I anchor my weight in the first chair to force the room to reconfigure around me? Cat and mouse. Asphyxiation. Which follow-up call or bureaucratic begging will I cancel in the next hour to plunge my target into sensory deprivation? GUI lock. In my mental Arturia Minilab 3, what results anxiety parameter must I drop to 0 while maximizing pre-compiled certainty? Emotional superconductivity. What useless friction, fear of appearing arrogant, must I freeze today to allow my magnetic will to flow? Death of slave. Proactivity. What repetitive pleading task will I delegate to automation to remain immovable in the core of gravity? Fundamental dominion frequency. When asked for discounts on my value, what will be my def, brief, and dictatorial statement to close the discussion? Black hole command. What massive, dark, and lonely thought will I load into RAM today to sink the mesh and force the stars to fall into my lap? Chapter 9. Zero Ping. Eliminating the lag of lack. In the vast, relentless, and meticulously programmed architecture of the three-dimensional simulation, the control system saves one final torture for those who have managed to cross the map. To the ordinary specimen, the framework inoculates a virus of cognitive desynchronization. It is a structural disconnection. We shall call this pathology of structural disconnection. This psychological abyss that separates the biological body from the reality it inhabits, the mirage of desynchronization. Observe the radiography of the captive who has just reached his goal. The individual has achieved financial success or signed the contract of his life. Physically, the objective is no longer miles away. It is sitting in the same room. The slave has the money in his hands or the crown upon his head. The 3D universe has collapsed in his favor. However, inside his motherboard, a catastrophic failure occurs. The prisoner experiences what is known as imposter syndrome. The individual looks at his own empire and feels it does not belong to him. His physical body is at point Z, success, but his mind remains trapped at point A, lack. He feels like a fraud. He feels someone will walk through the door, discover he is not a true monarch, and take everything away. He waits for permission. In the eyes of modern therapy and the compassionate herd, this individual simply suffers from insecurity and needs time to adapt. The system whispers, "It is normal to feel this way. Take your time to assimilate." Rome wasn't built in a day. The thermal trap has closed over his core, guaranteeing his crown rusts. What this organism ignores, with a technical blindness that condemns him to be a beggar sleeping on the floor of his own palace, is that insecurity is not a personality trait. It is a network latency problem. The prisoner is experiencing massive existential lag. Authority signal takes months to reach his brain. The labyrinth devours desynchronized kings. As long as humans believe they need time to feel deserving of what they already possess, they will emit the frequency of a scared thief. The first cause never experiences imposter syndrome. She optimizes her protocols and operates under the unshakable dictatorship of zero ping. The physics of entanglement, network architecture, and the bottleneck. To dismantle the blasphemy of imposter syndrome, we must dissect the perception of identity using computer network architecture, data packet transmission, and MIDI routing in Ableton Live 12. In network engineering, ping measures the time it takes for a data packet to travel to a server and back. This round-trip time is known as latency. Latency is governed by the fundamental network delay equation. Latency plus left and frac plus processing delay plus queuing delay die. If you play in a competitive 3D environment and your ping is 500 ms, you are dead. You are experiencing lag. By the time your action renders, the enemy has already destroyed you. You are a ghost reacting to a world that has already changed state. The prisoner of the labyrinth operates his entire life with a ping of 500,000 milliseconds. When the slave achieves a milestone, his brain sends a data packet to the social server. He sends a ping to the biomass, the culture, or his parents asking, "I have achieved this. Do I have permission to feel successful yet? Do you validate me as a monarch?" That packet must travel through society's network, the distance. It must pass through the bottleneck of others' opinions. It suffers envy delays. This journey can take weeks, months, or years. During all that latency, the slave is physically at the top, but psychologically at the bottom. He suffers from lag. He pressed the success key, but the emotional impact is not yet rendering because he is waiting for a slow, defective, and obsolete external server. The master architect assimilates this technical humiliation and destroys the network cable. He operates under the law of zero ping and localhost execution. In computing, localhost 127.0.00.1 is how a computer refers to itself. When you ping localhost, you send data directly to your own internal network card. There is no spatial distance, no external cables. Latency is mathematically zero. Your consciousness is the OS. When the architect conquers a territory, he does not ping the biomass for validation. He amputates the Wi-Fi. He sends the order directly to his own server. Identity and execution occupy the same coordinate. Zero ping means the imposter syndrome is disintegrated because the architect gives his brain no margin to doubt. Physical execution and psychological assimilation occur in the same Planck frame. He doesn't ask if he is the king. He renders the kingdom and sits on the throne simultaneously. The collapse of distance, quantum superposition of merit. The transmutation to the first cause demands the expropriation of merit without prior trial. The architect assimilates that the universe does not deliver resources because you are morally worthy. It delivers them because your gravitational density ripped them from orbit. He repudiates the notion of adaptation. He understands that if you need time to get used to power, power will detect your weak grip and slip through your fingers. He assumes the execution of topographic sovereignty, zero ping, and superposition of states. Imagine the architect during a quantum leap in his empire. His capital has multiplied. The framework immediately injects the lag of lack. The system says, "This is too big for you. You are just a child in a king's costume." The reactive individual would lower his head and wait years to feel comfortable. The architect executes quantum superposition of merit. In quantum mechanics, a particle exists in multiple states. It stays in superposition until it is measured, at which point the wave function collapses. The architect knows his old identity, slave, and his new identity, monarch, are not separated by an abyss of time. Both are possible wave functions. To collapse the wave instantly and avoid lag, he anchors his breath. He suspends the thermal friction of doubt. He performs the validation bypass. He looks at his bank numbers or the faces of titans at the table, and instead of seeking moral justifications, he applies the immutability of conscious matter. If the capital is in my vault, my code's syntax was correct. The server makes no mistakes. I am not an imposter. The throne is the hardware extension of my will. By declaring this on localhost, the architect eliminates the distance between him and his achievement. There is no probationary period for the king. He assumes the posture of absolute domain in millisecond 1. The environment, allies, adversaries, is forced to accept his authority as a pre-existing axiom. The architect refused to emit a single data packet suggesting he doubted his own legitimacy. He is the owner of the session, and the universe has no choice but to sync with his master clock. Buffer size and biological latency, the tactile console. To sustain zero ping, the architect must tune the interaction between his hardware and mental software using live session principles. When a producer connects an Arturia Minilab 3 to play a synth in real time, he faces the buffer size problem. If it is too high, the computer has time to think, but latency is brutal. The musician presses the key and the sound comes out half a second later. This temporal distance destroys the groove and disconnects the musician from his instrument. To play with lethal precision, the engineer must reduce the buffer size to the minimum, 32 or 64 samples. The CPU must be immensely powerful. When the buffer is low, the musician becomes one with the sound wave. The prisoner suffers imposter syndrome because his psychological buffer size is at maximum. His CPU is weak, saturated with trauma. He needs a giant buffer to process every win. He takes months to assimilate a promotion because he is processing fear. The architect installs the ultra-dense execution buffer. Having cleared his RAM in previous chambers, his central processor is free. He is a multi-core thermodynamic monster. He adjusts the buffer size of his identity to the absolute minimum. When the labyrinth delivers an empire, he does not store it to process later. He does not say, "Pinch me." He processes the victory in real time. Using the 60% keyboard metaphor, he presses the success key. The switch crosses the actuation point, contacts close, and in that identical millisecond, his authority signature blasts through the universe's monitors. There is no distance between skin and crown. Operating with a microscopic buffer, the architect experiences power in dry signal. This biomechanical sync between the body that executes and the mind that assimilates annuls all doubt. The self and power merge into a coherent phase laser that cuts through reality without asking the world's latency for permission. The permission firewall, external port blocking. The last obstacle to zero ping is the biomass's attempt to force you to reopen your network ports. The labyrinth hates entities operating on localhost. Society will demand you prove your credentials and submit to herd audits to see if you are worthy. They want to send malicious data, ping of death, to saturate you. The architect executes port blocking via acoustic immutability, firewall drop. In IT security, you can reject a connection, which tells the attacker you are there, or you can drop. In drop mode, the firewall ignores the packet. It returns no response. To the attacker, it's as if the server doesn't exist. When the environment, a detractor or jealous competitor, demands you ask permission to shine, the architect does not defend himself, reject. Defending is opening the port and consuming energy. The architect applies drop mode. He looks the attacker in the eye and assimilates with absolute zero. No justification is given. He does not show credentials. He lets the demand fall into the anechoic chamber of his silence. The attacker experiences a timeout. The attack disintegrates. The architect's value is not listed on the "what will they say" exchange. His authority is a closed-circuit local network, walled by a firewall of indifference. Final calibration, immediate assimilation protocol and the death of lag. To forge the zero-latency synchronization of a master architect, you must today install a regime of computer tyranny over your capacity to believe your own victories. Stop treating success as a borrowed suit. Start treating it as the genetic code you programmed in your own vault. The process demands intervention. Step 1. Social server disconnection, turning off validation Wi-Fi. I declare an absolute prohibition on sending pings to the biomass seeking approval for a high-level achievement. If you ask if you did it right, you already did it wrong. Audit your channels. Identify the people you turn to for validity. Take the virtual cable of that dependency and cut it. Isolate your network. Decree that the only IP address authorized to audit your value is 127.00.1. Step 2. Zero buffer in victory. suppression of astonishment. You must eliminate psychological rendering time, murder the phrase, "I still can't believe it." Next time you close a colossal sale, I forbid you from celebrating with hysterical euphoria. Euphoria is the slave's shock at a stroke of luck. Enter the fold of the now. Drop your mental buffer size to 0. Assimilate the impact in dry signal. Be one with your power the exact millisecond it manifests. Step 3. Port blocking against scrutiny. The silence firewall. The supreme hack is sealed by protecting sync against outside noise. When the labyrinth demands you justify your position at the top, activate drop mode. Close the ports of your empathetic interface. Do not detail your sacrifices. Maintain titanium posture. Force the molecules of the room to accept that your mere presence is the only valid credential. The distance between a man and a king is not measured in time, but in the ballistic speed with which the king refuses to doubt his own throne. You are the server, and the simulation is the client. 11 reflection commands for zero ping. Existential latency audit. In what area have I already obtained the 3D result, but still feel like a slave because my brain refuses to download my new identity? External server disconnection. To whom am I still sending a validation ping before daring to wear the crown I forged? Local host mapping, 127.0.1. If my own certainty is the only server that matters, what ruthless decision will I execute today without consulting anyone? Buffer size. Instead of saying pinch me at a triumph, how will I anchor my breath to assimilate success with the sterile apathy of the engineer? Imposter syndrome death. If the framework accuses me of being a fraud, what level of drop mode will I apply to my ports? Interface synchronization. In which interaction is my body saying I am the leader, but my micro-expressions saying sorry for leading? False humility extirpation. What colossal achievement am I trying to minimize to avoid intimidating others, degrading my signal in the process? Dry signal execution. What financial or physical milestone will I normalize in my mind today, treating it as the basic floor of my operations? The permission firewall. What unnegotiable limit will I impose today without explanation, operating under the right of my own I am? Friction versus quantum collapse. Am I waiting for time to make me feel secure, or do I have the courage to become the beast in this exact millisecond? Direct immutability command. What is the heaviest, darkest thought about my identity I will anchor in RAM today, refusing to let the world test it? Chapter 10. The unique coordinate, the parametric Aleph. In the immense and terrifying architecture of the 3D simulation, the control system has encoded its masterpiece of subjugation. To the ordinary specimen, the framework has inoculated the illusion of ungraspable immensity. We shall call this pathology of ontological smallness the mirage of dispersion. Observe the captive's radiography. The rendering engine projects a universe of astronomical proportions. It shows a world of 8 billion human nodes and financial markets operating in dozens of time zones. The system whispers, "Look how huge the world is. Everything that matters is scattered out there. You are an infinitesimal fraction of stardust." Under this hypnosis, the prisoner accepts his insignificance as a thermodynamic fact. He assumes that to dominate even a portion of reality, he must go out into the world, scatter his energy, and travel. The cognitive trap has closed, ensuring he never reaches critical mass because he has diluted his gravity. What this organism ignores is that the immensity of the outer universe is a mathematical scam. The world out there has no solidity. It is a projection of uncompiled data. The first cause never goes out to conquer a map. She discovers that all wonders and terrors collapse exactly under the sole of her own shoes. The physics of entanglement, the master channel and analog summing. To dismantle the blasphemy of immensity, we must dissect the matrix using master signal routing and the literature of higher dimensions. Genius Jorge Luis Borges described the Aleph, a point in space containing all other points. Whoever looks into the Aleph sees the entire universe simultaneously from all angles. In Elite Audio Engineering and Ableton Live 12, the Aleph is a technical reality known as the master bus. Imagine a musical project with 500 independent tracks, drums, synths, and voices. Visually, the project is ungraspable. If the engineer looks at each track individually, he goes insane. But the physics of sound dictates an absolute law of unification. At the moment of execution, all that chaotic immensity is mathematically forced to flow through a single output channel, the master bus. The sum of all signals in an instant is compressed into one. The master bus is the parametric Aleph, Parametric. The prisoner lives looking at the 500 separate tracks. Economy, enemies, family. He is overwhelmed trying to control the mix track by track. The master architect situates himself exclusively in the master bus of his own consciousness. He assumes the entire universe is simply tracks routed to his console. The world does not exist independently of him. It is the file rendering through his brain this microsecond. Therefore, he does not need to travel to alter it. If the universe flows through his master bus, he only needs to apply compression and EQ to himself for the entire simulation to modify simultaneously. The collapse of distance, ruling from coordinate 0. The transmutation to the first cause demands the act of tactical solipsism, the expropriation of space. The architect assimilates that looking outward is a distraction for slaves. He repudiates externality. He assumes topographic sovereignty, the singularity collapse and government from coordinate 0. Imagine the architect before his 60% mechanical keyboard and infinite encoders. That desk seems like a tiny point on a planet. The framework whispers, "You have to leave this room to conquer." The architect stops the rendering engine of dispersion. He sinks the roots of his presence into the pelvic floor. He understands that the distance between his room and international bank vaults is simply a hologram. In quantum information physics, each piece of the hologram contains the whole. The architect decrees the unique coordinate. His desk is the center of rotation of the Milky Way. There is no out there. All the money and empire he demands exist in quantum superposition, floating millimeters from his fingers. When he hits the tactile switch, he is not sending a message to a distance. He is altering the master variable in the main line of code. He generates a sonic boom in the source code. The 3D world is forced to kneel before coordinate 0. International markets bend to deposit capital in his node. Strategic allies sync with his phase. To move the world, you don't need a long lever. You just need to realize the whole world fits inside your chest and have the brutality to squeeze your fists. The definitive bounce, exporting the universe to audio. Dominion over the unique coordinate culminates in the final engineering process, exporting the file. When a producer finishes sculpting the master bus in Ableton, he executes export audio, bounce. The computer converts thousands of variables into a single, solid, and unalterable stereo file, .wav. During the bounce, time and space stop being interactive. Everything collapses into the immutability of crystallized conscious matter. The slave never bounces his life. He lives in arrangement view, always modifying, fearing the future, and leaving the project open. He is afraid to close the file. The master architect executes the definitive thermal rendering. He has murdered the horizon, collapsed the stereo, and killed longing. He has crossed the sound barrier and amputated intermediaries. There is nothing left to explore out there. The illusion of distance has been completely dismantled. The architect presses the export audio button on his own identity and the entire universe. He consolidates the parametric Aleph. He assumes all power is already contained in the file of his own consciousness. He accepts the majestic and lonely weight of being the first cause. He is all places. Distance becomes a relic of the past, a bad joke the labyrinth used to scare children. The architect leans back in his chair, listens to the dry signal playback of his own consolidated empire, and closes the session. He leaves the 3D simulation operating exclusively under the geometric dictatorship of his will. Final calibration, the Aleph protocol and master bus singularity. To forge the omnipotent core of a master architect, you must install a regime of topographical tyranny. Stop treating the universe as a gigantic ocean you are drowning in. Treat it as a drop of code already contained within your own processor. The process demands immediate, sadistic intervention. Step 1. Dispersion audit, multi-track scanner. I declare an absolute prohibition on being overwhelmed by the amount of things happening in the world. Being overwhelmed is the technical confession you are trying to process reality before it hits the master bus. Unplug the peripheral monitors. Step 2. Master channel redirection, coordinate collapse. Do not run to conquer the world. You cannot conquer a hologram, you must conquer the projector. Position your hands on your console, enter the fold of the now. Demand that all tracks of the universe route toward the center of your chest. Feel the parametric Aleph. Force yourself to visualize that the offices of your partners and the resources of Earth are not separated by miles. They are physically on your 60% keyboard, compressed in a data block waiting for your order. The only valid coordinate is where you are breathing. Step 3. Immutability export, the bounce command. The supreme hack is sealed by assuming you are the start and end of the simulation. Stop looking for answers out there. In the next commercial challenge, do not ask how to reach the goal. Press the export audio button. Assume the empire is rendered. Inject your I am into the motherboard with such compression that distance and time disintegrate. Rule from the absolute zero of your room. Infinity was never a place to travel to. It is a state of resonance reached by suffocating reality in the palm of your own hand. The file is closed. A reflection commands to consolidate the unique coordinate. Dispersion audit. Where do I feel small? Validating the lie that the outer universe is more uncontrollable than my core. Aleph collapse. If all Earth's power is compressed into the key I press today, what precision will I inject in that millisecond? Master bus expropriation. Which external problems will I stop processing track by track, compressing them under my internal discipline? Insignificance death. How does my chest pressure change when I assume society is a file hosted on my own server? Monarch rendering. What irrevocable decision will I take today, executing the bounce and shielding my crown? Horizon shutdown. What physical action will I perform from absolute zero, forcing the goal to collapse onto me? Hologram assimilation. How will I exploit my superiority today by operating from the icy certainty that the map does not exist? Conscious matter compression. What sub-base instruction will I emit today, demonstrating I command the entire space? The here singularity. What complaint about my country or the market will I permanently murder today? Friction versus omnipresence. Am I running around, group velocity, or assuming the phase velocity of a black hole? Definitive closure command. What final, dense, latency-free command will I inject this instant to claim the universe? Conclusion. The collapse of the universe into the motherboard. The definitive grimoire is sealed. The holographic topography of the simulation has been dismantled before your very eyes. You have audited the fraud of acoustic reverberation, the schizophrenic panning of society, and the lie of logistical transit. At this command terminal, the illusion of distance lies dead on the floor. It has been suffocated by the massive gravity of your own immutability. You now understand that the three-dimensional labyrinth was never immense. You were simply looking at it through the distorting lens of scarcity. The system made you believe that to reclaim your territory, you had to drag your biological body across the map. They lied to you. Reality is not a physical map, it is a sterile server. The entire universe, with its foreign corporations, its intermediaries, and its treasures, is simply conscious matter routed directly into your master channel. When you operate from the zero latency of your reduced format console, there are no kilometers. When your will presses the tactile pads of your internal hardware without hesitation, there are no time zones. The elite goal is not out there, it is collapsed into the motherboard of your own identity, waiting for you to cut the analog cable of longing, annul the stereo field, and execute the definitive rendering. By anchoring your core in the fold of the now and emitting the sub-bass frequency of your I am, the quantum network bends. You are no longer the pilgrim running toward the horizon. You are the architect. You do not pursue, you assimilate, you do not beg, you type. You have transformed the infinite abyss into a glass screen. You have shattered that screen without emitting a single frame of effort. To seal the code of this work into your biological hard drive and shield your empire, execute these 11 final compilation commands in your terminal. The Mirage Audit. Do I recognize with mathematical coldness that distance is only a holographic parameter designed to exhaust my thermal energy? The Death of Transit. Am I ready to extirpate the need to travel physically to reclaim the capital that my code has already conquered? The Master Bypass. Have I silenced the white noise of intermediaries attempting to introduce latency and attenuation into my network? The Collapse to Mono. Have I forced my reality to the absolute center, destroying the illusion that lack and abundance inhabit different speakers? The Extirpation of Longing. Will I replace the slave's weak hope with the dry and dictatorial signal of my own parametric assimilation? Acoustic Teleportation. Do I assume my phase velocity to colonize commercial territories before my biomass even crosses the door? Supersonic Breakout. Will I use the deafening shriek of fear, Doppler effect, as thermodynamic confirmation that I am breaking the sound barrier? Gravitational Magnetism. Will I become the static black hole that forces resources and alliances to slide submissively toward my center of gravity? Local host execution. Have I adjusted my ping to 0, eliminating imposter syndrome in the same millisecond of three-dimensional victory? Sovereignty of the Aleph. Do I assume that the entire universe flows through my master bus and has no choice but to surrender to my down talk? The unique coordinate. Do I understand, in an unnegotiable and radioactive way, that everything I love, demand, and govern was never far away? Was it always exactly one thought away? The compilation is complete. The distance is 0. The throne is occupied.